Hi everybody and welcome to Hope Church Alongside. I'm a little bit hesitant actually about calling this Hope Church Alongside at all because what's going to follow is very much a kind of personal take on the way we think about life and stuff and all of those things in the light of the whole George Floyd thing and the way that it's sort of playing out, the way it's almost like being pushed into our consciousness and requiring an answer from us. So this is a really personal thing. I kind of doubt that anyone is that interested, but if you are, like, here's the take. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the way that Isaiah and some of the texts in Isaiah that we looked at earlier, particularly around the issue of justice and stuff like that, how those could be brought to play and how they could influence some of our thinking around the topic. So at first sight, last time we looked at Isaiah 42, we looked at it as justice as judgment. Well, this time, okay, so we've got Isaiah 50. My righteousness draws near speedily, my salvation is on the way, and my arm will bring justice, judgment to the nations. So there you go, you got the same thing. The islands will look to me and wait and hope for my arm. So it's kind of like the enforced judgment of God. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke, earth wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants die like flies, but my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail. Hear me, you who know what is right. You people have taken my instruction to heart. Do not fear the approach of mere mortals, or be terrified by the insults, for the moth will eat them up like a garment, the worm will devour them like wool. But my righteousness will last forever, my salvation through all generations. Now, you might be saying, well, okay, so we've got justice and we've got righteousness and we've got God's arm and we've got those who fear the Lord. So this is really something where the whole George Floyd thing is, it's unjust, which it is, fine. So this is something that should really be grabbing our attention as Christians as we kind of execute this. Now, I've said before that as we look at all of these ideas about God's judgment, we're looking at his judgments over the earth, and we have to see these with Jesus. I mean, we can't look at them sort of on their own and say, well, there's something called justice, like a goddess, and then there's Jesus, but justice is not actually kind of what Jesus is doing. I mean, Jesus is God's justice on earth. So we're going to have a little look at the way that Jesus taught about some stuff, and we're going to consider the whole George Floyd thing, how we react to that in the light of Jesus's teaching and the way that he brings it to bear on this kind of a question. So if you have a look we're going to go into Luke 10 here. It's a very famous thing. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. So a teacher of the law, an expert in the law, stands up to test me. He said, Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What's written? He replied, how do you read it? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So that is a big win. I mean, that's right. So that's the first thing. You have answered correctly. So the first thing, that's absolutely true. We need to be thinking with the law. Although the law won't necessarily solve our problem of eternal life, we need to be thinking with the law. So we need to be filling our mind with the law and teaching of God, rather than necessarily reaching outside and basing our value system on things that aren't there in the law of God. But the teacher of the law goes on and he says, you've answered correctly, but the teacher of the law wanted to justify himself. And there's quite a bit of that around. It seems to me that a lot of the time, as I'm listening to what's going on about George Floyd, people are almost wanting to justify themselves. They're wanting to step away from what they perceive as racist and to put themselves on the innocent side of the story. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't an innocent side of the story, but this desire to justify ourselves might indeed run contrary to the whole thing of loving your neighbor and loving God. Now, in other words, what people think of us and what God thinks of us are always going to be different. And sometimes if we're kind of concerned about what people think of us, we can end up not loving our neighbor. Now, I mean, in practice, how might that play out? Well, let's have a look at some of the things here in the story. So when you look in the story, Jesus tells this story, very famous. The guy's robbed, so there is an injustice there, if you like. Two priest Levite, they go past, and then the Samaritan comes along, and it says he took pity on him. And that pity for his neighbor, the guy who was smack in front of him, is what makes the Samaritan, in some ways, the ideal hero of the story. So my question is the whole George Floyd thing taking up bandwidth in our heads that is stopping us taking pity on the people who are smack in front of us? And the people who are smack in front of us, they could be people in our phone book, they could be people in our neighborhood, or they could be people further afield. So you see what the Samaritan does. The Samaritan not only takes a risk, but he also digs into his wallet. He spends money. So this is a costly love for the person who's in front of him. Now, Jesus says, he asked the expert in the law, and the expert says, look, the one who had mercy on him, go and do likewise. So essentially, there's the question you want to ask. As we talk about the whole George Floyd thing, might we be being distracted from loving our neighbor? Actually doing something for the people that we can do stuff for. So, I mean, here's just an example. The Yemen appeal. There you go, the Yemen appeal. It's got a £1 billion shortfall. And in some ways, you can do something about this. I mean, you can put your hand in your pocket, and that money can go to people who are really in danger. And you'll see this being called a sort of a macabre tragedy, because we're actually pretty distracted, I think, from what we could be doing. There's a risk that we could be distracted from our neighbors by trying to be on the right side of the story. I'm not arguing about what the right side of the story is. I'm just saying, if that's taking the bandwidth in our head and distracting us from what we can do practically and financially, then we have an issue. Now, of course, you might want to say to me, but there are structural reasons. There are some structural injustices that are causing oppression, they're causing all these things. Even if that were true, and you'll notice that the Samaritan didn't do anything about the structural injustice, but even suppose that we're supposed to be doing it, which is actually easier to deal with? I would ask, is it easier to deal with the structural injustice around the civil war in Yemen, where maybe our government might have some kind of traction over its trading partners? Or is it easier to address a structural injustice in the United States, where it seems to me I don't know how much traction we have over anything? I mean, and like, even if you're looking into police killings, do we have any traction on what's going on in the Philippines? Or, a bunch of other places where the police execute people pretty much with impunity. So my question would be, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to execute the judgments of men or the judgments of God? Are we looking at what others should be doing? Are we looking at what we should be doing? Have we got a love our neighbor mindset? Or are we kind of maybe being caught up in a story where being on the right side of that story is super important to us? Now, I mean, again, really happy to talk about that if people want to talk about it. I know it's a hot topic, and maybe I'm on the wrong side of the story, but there you go. Hope that helped, or at least gave something to think about, and love you all. Take care. Bye.